Good evening, morning, afternoon, night, whenever you find your way to watch or listen to this. We have a familiar face on the podcast, and straight off of his shift at Staples, this is a working blue collar man. We got Dan, the man, Steenkamer, to talk some FCS topics as he's done before. Dan, how's everything going?
Well, I think you described it perfectly. I got back home not too long ago, put in a good day's work at the office, and I'll be back at the fields tomorrow morning. So that's just kind of switching between those two settings, but I like it. It's going well here, and it's August, so I'm outside too. I'm getting fresh air too as we're doing this, so I couldn't be better.
Absolutely, man. Glad to have you on again, man. And I mean, you've been putting in work. The way you put it, even on a Sunday, like to go to the fields for Delaware's fall camp, and then going to work, and then just put in that work. It's really admirable, man. It's like
Hey, I'm fortunate. I'm fortunate to have the access in the first place, and fortunate to be working. And so, I mean, I'm busy. It's good to be busy. It's good to be active. So I think I'm fortunate.
for
Yeah.
sure. For sure. I mean, as I'm starting to apply for credentials, I mean, just getting the approval is half the battle, or like, honestly, like 80% of the battle. But yeah, I'm excited to have you on, talk some Northeast FCS topics, particularly Patriot League, and also get a little scoop on what you have been looking at in terms of Delaware. So ready to kick this thing off. But in as I often do, I often like wonder, I mean, I have poor focus, at times. So like I was thinking about Colgate Stanford on during the workday. And I thought to myself, I was like, man, writing about Colgate earlier in the spring, and I realized that Andy Kerr coached the East West Shrine game for almost like 2+ decades. He was a head coach of the East team. And for those of you unaware of Andy Kerr, he's the namesake of Colgate Stadium. I mean, obviously the greatest coach of all time, a college football Hall of Famer. His greatest team, it's an excuse to bring this up, the 1932 undefeated, untied, unscored upon, and uninvited team that was uninvited to the Rose Bowl, where Pittsburgh was invited instead of Colgate, and ended up getting blown out. Yeah, so Andy Kerr coached the East West Shrine game, so the connections are there with the East West Shrine game, but the East West Shrine game was played in the Bay Area for almost all of it, for most of its existence, excuse me, until the late 90s, I believe, when it moved to, I think, Houston, when it moved to Houston. But the East West Shrine was played in the Bay Area for a number of years. So for Colgate fans who are old enough to remember the Andy Kerr days, very few left. This is kind of a special sort of homecoming for them. But I thought to myself, maybe this should be a sort of, not really rotating series, but an occasional series. So just Dan, I want to know, I guess, your thoughts on Colgate making the long trek out to Stanford, California. I almost said San Francisco, but the Bay Area.
Well, it is a big trip for Colgate. It's going to get them in an entirely new market that they haven't seen for a little while. I guess we don't know the Pac-12's media rights deal as it's being put together for future years, such as the game we're talking about. So not sure how it'll be televised. I know this would typically be maybe a Pac-12 network game. It's this year?
Yeah. So it's this year. It's a opening weekend, and it is I think it's a Pac-12 network game, obviously.
Pac-12
I know
network.
we're so used
I
to
was
talking
looking
about,
ahead
like,
to a future year. I thought we were talking about a future year in the series. But when you're looking
this
at,
year.
we'll have a Pac-12. So the Pac-12 network is still around. We don't know if it'll be around beyond this season. Pac-12 network is still alive and well. So we'll get them on those households that are in that footprint. But the historical tie is interesting, right? Because I think in reality, it's probably pretty much just coincidental, right? I mean, I would think Colgate was really looking for. It does check a couple boxes. When I say that, I mean, you get a great academic opponent. I mean, Colgate being in the Patriot League and having the reputation it has, even apart from its Patriot League status, is terrific. And you play Stanford, and that's just a game that makes a lot of sense for those two names. And then it's going to be a great check for Colgate to receive to get that I want to say revenue, but it is a little bit of revenue in a way to use that word strangely in this context to cover those expenses, including the cost of getting out there in the first place. So I'm sure Stanford covered the Colgate's bill pretty well, and it'll be beneficial, of course, financially in that way. But also, it is nice for Colgate to be playing an FBS opponent that is so highly regarded academically. It makes sense. If it's not going to be a regional game, right? If it's going to be intersectional, picking Stanford in that mix out of any, it probably makes more sense than any other Pac-12 opponent. Certainly more sense than like something like a Washington State or an Oregon State. I would think that Colgate, its preference would be to face a school like Stanford that really has that name and recognition.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit on the head. I mean, with I guess academic peers, because if you look at, I guess, like, the service academies, that's kind of like a big philosophy that, for a number of years, the academic peer sort of thing, where they play the private schools, or at least the private Power Fives. I guess Army this year plays Wake Forest. I mean, the whole academic peer thing is pretty huge. What's interesting for me is, of course, like the long track. I mean, because Colgate has played Army, frequently. I think they do play Army. I think this year they do play Army. um and it's like it would be so easy for them to play a regional opponent, like they did like Boston College last year, Army, like I said. But it's interesting too that they're making this trek. But do you see, I guess, value in the occasional trip to the Bay Area, whether it's Stanford or even San Jose State? It's another school that's in the Bay Area.
I think it would be a stretch to equate the same value with Stanford and San Jose State, just because from Colgate's perspective, it just doesn't make as much sense to have the name Stanford on the schedule and then sub that in for with SJSU. It's just not the same. Once it's used brand again, it really comes down very much to brand name and brand value in a way. So, of course, you'd also be stepping away from the Power Five in the case of San Jose State. Now, it's not to say any San Jose State slander whatsoever. They've been a program. Nick Starkel and those boys. They've got some swagger back more recently. I've been paying attention to them out in the Mountain West, but I think from the perspective of Colgate, it has to make sense. I think if you're going all the way across country, it has to be for an opponent like Stanford. I really do. Now, of course, somebody writes a large enough Power 5 level check, even if they're a G5, if they're writing a big enough check to cover those expenses and get some extra revenue, that's a different discussion maybe. But I think this is the right combination for Colgate this season to be playing at Stanford. I would have way more pause if it were even just another Pac-12 school, just because it clicks. And we were talking off air about Delaware Navy. That's a regional rivalry across divisions, or across subdivisions rather, in Division I, that really clicks and makes sense for both sides. So this Colgate Stanford, in a much different way without the geography, still has the institutional identities are a little more similar. And so, of course, Stanford's size is much different and their climates are much different. But I'm talking just about the institutional priorities and their cultures, they really are a little more, have more resemblance.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, like, it's funny you say that though about like them getting their worthwhile, because I know that San Jose State scheduled a home game against Holy Cross in 2029 or 2020 or 2030, a game that I'm hoping to go to. As that's the ultimate Borja Bowl, because my dad from the Bay Area, in Monterey, and then of course we grew up. I mean, I grew up watching Holy Cross games with my dad, so I mean, it's definitely a Borja Bowl for sure. But but that being said, yeah, I mean that's a good point too. I guess about getting your worthwhile, but it's you know, honestly, I'm all for like coach legacy games. I know San Jose State they're in a couple. They're in the Bill Walsh legacy game, with Stanford. They're in the Dick Tomey legacy game with Hawaii. So it's like I just feel like it's so good, especially with a league like the Patriot League that is so rich in history, to have these sort of like touch points with history. So I mean, I totally encourage Colgate, maybe every few years going to the Bay Area, and heck, let's make a trophy game out of it, because I mean, if Bob Diaco can
I
create
was
the
gonna
civil
say, I was about to
conflict,
mention, you sound like
yeah.
Bob Diaco right now. Be careful, because I want to age well for you. Okay, so we just don't have no civil conflict here. Don't have a civil conflict.
Yeah, no civil conflict. But I mean, I'm all for the Andy Kerr legacy game. And like, heck, why not have the Shrine game, the Shrine Bowl, put their backing on it. So I mean, yeah, that's just something I thought of too. I mean, let's make the Andy Kerr legacy game happen. This year, get some branding. But yeah, so yeah. But I guess moving on to our next topic, looking at Delaware's, I'm always a fan of the non-conference games more so than conference games. But looking at Delaware's non-conference schedule, they got Navy, Delaware State. They got the Route 1 rivalry. I'm getting my highways mixed up, because like there's a bunch of rivalries in the world of sports named after highways. You have like even in the indoor football, you have the I-10 tussle, probably like my favorite rivalry name out there between the Arizona Rattlers and the Tucson Sugar Skulls. But yeah, you have the Route 1 rivalry, and then you have Morgan State. So a pretty interesting non-conference thing. The first thing for me is like, aside from the Navy game, neither of those games are really like a resume win. Do you kind of see like this lack of strength of schedule kind of hurting Delaware's shots at an at-large bid, or do you think that a strong season in conference play is ahead and will help them to get into the playoffs?
I do think that while this looks on paper like somewhat paltry out of conference schedule for Delaware. It really is not much different than a typical out of conference schedule for UD. I mean, in non-conference, Delaware, and I've talked to administrators at UD about this a little bit this summer, and it's just something that's been a mainstay for the department as a priority, is getting a minimum of 6 home games every season, because Delaware still ranks in the top 10 nationally in the FCS in attendance, or average home attendance per game. So it's one of those schools where home games, there's a demand for tickets for home games. There needs to be a certain number of home games per season to satisfy demand, even though it's deflated a little bit over the years. Certainly, Delaware is not at its peak or its heyday in terms of attendance. It's probably decreased per game by like 7,000 people in my lifetime, just with the ebbs and flows of ticket prices and turmoil about in the, or not within the program, but in terms of the team's success. But that's a different podcast episode. But not to overstate Delaware's demand, but the demand is still there for tickets, right? And so Delaware has made it a point to still have a minimum of 6 home games a season. Now in the FCS, if you're a higher, traditionally higher end program, or a big name program such as Delaware, it's hard to find home and homes still within the FCS against other FCS opponents. Delaware, I've been told, has been among the top offerers of buy games to other FCS schools, and I don't know how far across the country they've called and made phone calls. And I mean, they brought in Dixie State last fall, in fall 2021. I know that was a pretty steep price to get Dixie State all the way across the country. Now Dixie State was really going on tour, was really barnstorming and playing a whole bunch of top line big brand FCS schools as it was making its transition into the subdivision. So that was a little bit of a unique situation, perhaps, where maybe even Dixie State reached out to Delaware in the first place. Now, I don't know if that's the case for certain, but Delaware maybe didn't even necessarily have to pick up the phone for Dixie State. But to put that Utah Tech trail aside, because at the time they were Dixie State, but now they're Utah Tech. To put Utah Tech aside, Delaware has trouble finding schools who are interested in a buy game where there's no return game, there's no home and home. So even with the ante upped, with an offer upped for more money for just a single road trip to Newark, Delaware hasn't always found the most willing partners over time. That's what they've communicated to me in interviews with them. But at the same time, it's demonstrated in terms of there's not a ton of variety in opponents that you see come through in a non-conference. Delaware State is a regular series where there's no money changing hands. From what I know, it's a series that's popular with officials in the state. It kind of brings the state together, brings together an HBCU as well as the predominantly white institution at Delaware. So I think there are a lot of pluses to that from both schools' perspectives. So you have Delaware State plugged in there, and then there's really a wild card in terms of that other home game in this particular season that's filled by Morgan State. In past years, you've seen a Patriot League school such as Lafayette fill that role. So really, there hasn't really been a ton of change. Morgan State will be a new name, and they'll be one of a couple HBCUs aside from Delaware State to come into Delaware Stadium this year, as Hampton is in the CAA and comes to Newark also this coming season. So actually a heavy dose of HBCUs for Delaware fans this season. Those particular HBCUs coming in, whether they be DSU, Morgan, or Hampton, not necessarily the strongest HBCU programs out there at the moment. So it might not be the best representation to these Delaware fans of what HBCU football can be, and certainly is at a number of places. But to answer the point in particular, this is a pretty routine schedule for Delaware in terms of out of conference, and it will hurt their strength of schedule, that's to be sure. Although the difference is in this season, the conference schedule still stacks up to be a pretty good chance at building a resume. I mean, Delaware will have games against Richmond, Monmouth, and Villanova. Elon is in there too, William and Mary. These are all schools that figure to be in the mix for the top half of the CEA standings. And so any wins against any of the above are going to be important for FCS playoff, even seeding, if Delaware can get in that range and really get in the auto bid range of the conference. So, of course, if you're in the auto bid range, you're not even worrying about an at-large, which speaks to your question. But I would say that the out-of-conference schedule does apply pressure to Delaware to get it done in conference, because if you pick up a couple out-of-conference wins, such as against DSU and Morgan, it's really not turning a lot of heads, right? Whereas in the Big Sky and Missouri Valley, some of those schools are playing those crossover games in the Big Sky and Valley Challenge. In that series, that challenge series really affords a lot of chances for ranked wins out of conference. And Delaware really will not have ranked wins out of conference from what we can expect. They do face Morgan in October. So if Morgan just turns heads and it goes on a tear, I could be telling a different story. But from what we expect right now in preseason, that Navy game that we've just touched on a little bit is going to be that big out of conference chance, that non-con game that'll really be a chance to build a resume. But I guess a summary would be, not a lot of variety to Delaware non-conference home games over time lately. Part of that is just Delaware's inability to get away from, or just get deals that get buy games that are not home and homes, and their really reluctance to budge on that to meet that minimum 6 home games per season, regardless of how the calendar looks. So it's a situation where Delaware is used to it. I think they're used to a schedule such as this, but it does apply pressure to get it done in conference.
Yeah, I mean, shoot, I wasn't aware that the schedules. Well, I mean, I guess that this is a typical schedule. Like looking in the future too, it's like you look. Of course, you have the Route One rivalry long term. Then you have your FBS game, and aside from that, it's like not much schedule, filling from Delaware in the future. Just a quick peek at FB schedules too, and also 200 point with Morgan State and Delaware State. It's like you didn't say which poll. I guess which poll I guess that we're pulling ranked wins from, because I mean Delaware State and Morgan State could very well be ranked in the HBCU in the box to row HBCU
Right.
poll. But I know that's a totally separate thing. For our folks, that pick the HBCU national title, the Black College Football National Championship.
And that's valid. And that's a valid poll. Don't get me wrong. I was just referring to the
yeah.
stats reform poll that nationally, including HBCUs, but that poll includes HBCUs as well. But yep, certainly depending which ranking you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, it would help Delaware regardless. If Morgan State were ranked in that poll, they would have had to have a winning record, you'd have to say, going into the October game against UD. So I think that'd be a plus for the Hens.
For sure. And I mean, with the 16 MEAC, having a win over a conference champion, it could be a boost for sure. Yeah, so I guess also that being said, we hinted a little bit at the Navy game. Something that an upset I feel like a lot of people don't talk about, myself included, is that 2007 Delaware Navy upset where Joe Flacco went into Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium and upset the Naval Academy, which this wasn't a bad Navy team. Like that Navy team went to the Poinsettia Bowl. They almost beat Utah, a Utah team that was destined for the Sugar Bowl the next year. I guess do you see this upset? Do you see, I guess, a reoccurrence of upset of Delaware over Navy this year? Because for me, from my perspective, it's like a lot of people, or I wouldn't say a lot of people, some people that I've interacted with on Twitter are high on Navy improving, but like not reaching that sort of bowl plateau. And they point to, especially they point to the offense group, because the last couple of years, Navy's option has just not been what we're used to. And a lot of that starts with the quarterback play. I mean, a lot of people are high on Ty Lavatai in his second year in the system, kind of getting things, because I mean, I'm not sure how many people remember, but Malcolm Perry had a rough first few games as a starter in 2018. Ty Lavatai had a pretty rough season. Sadly, he showed flashes against Army. Yeah. So I guess what do you see? I guess what are the odds you see of Delaware pulling the upset against Navy?
It's a good question. It's a good question because it being the season opener for both teams, there's so many unknowns, right? There's a lot of unknowns, and for Delaware, it'll be its first game under Ryan Carty as head coach, and it'll be the first game of live action where Delaware is running its new offense under Coach Carty. It'll be a pass-heavy offense, or at least it's expected to be a pass-heavy one based on Coach Carty's track record at New Hampshire and Sam Houston. And it's going to really be an opposite to what Navy's going to be bringing with the option. But I do favor Navy in the game. I think Navy will have enough to take it over Delaware, in large part because Ty Lavatai he has the confidence of Coach Niumatalolo. Coach Niumatalolo's already instilled him as the starter once again. I had that vote of confidence from Navy Football Media Day. And so I think Navy will have an edge just in terms of the administration of their offense. The option is so hard to defend. It's not an offense that Delaware sees very often at all. I'd have a hard time pinpointing the last time the Fighting Blue Hens saw the option. It would have had to be maybe even, if you want to say, almost as far back as the last time they faced Navy in 2013, might have been the last option appearance, because Delaware's really not playing SoCon schools out of conference. So you're not getting Wofford, or you haven't gotten the Citadel in a bit if you're Delaware. Of course, Georgia Southern moved up to the FBS. So we have not seen Georgia Southern and Delaware collide in quite some time since their 2010 semifinal game in Newark. But I'd have to say it's going to be a situation where Delaware does benefit from having the extra week in preparation, it being the week one. You get a little bit of preseason time in addition to game week in order to really ramp up your defensive prep for the triple option. But that even with that, Delaware's offense will have its first test in a new system going against the depth of a bowl subdivision team, a team that goes so much deeper in terms of full scholarship players. Navy will be rolling in defenders who are on full scholarship, maybe 2 and 3 deeper than Delaware can roll out on offense. The depth will be tested. You wonder if Nolan Henderson will be healthy throughout the game, because at Rutgers last season, Delaware's FBS game there, he aggravated, injuries or a single injury that was bothering him there. And it just, Delaware took a turn for the worse with Henderson banged up coming out of Rutgers. So you wonder if Nolan Henderson, he's certainly a strong kid. His frame is really beefed up since day one when he got to campus, but he has an injury history, and Delaware's offensive line is retooled with a number of transfers coming in for Coach Carty, but you just haven't seen the offensive line go to work in a game yet. And so with question marks in the offensive line, as well as they tie into question marks about Nolan Henderson's ability to stay on the field especially against an FBS defense that is so tough and physically gifted. I just have a hard time, pinpointing Delaware is going to be the pick to win this one for those reasons. But you'd hope it would look to be, if you're a Delaware fan, just a competitive ball game, hang in there, be in the game in the fourth quarter. It's the same formula that every school is using, but especially against a G5 where it really feels gettable. And there's a history here. There's a regional rivalry aspect to this series, and the fact that it hasn't been played in a number of years, I know there's the heavy demand from Delaware fans to get to Annapolis. It should be well attended for both schools.
Yeah, that last point you made about it not being played for a while, it's like the thing is like getting a non-conference game with Navy's probably got to be the hardest thing to do in the country because they have 3 of their 4 slots taken by traditional rivalries. Of course, the Army, Army and Air Force, and the Notre Dame rivalry, which I don't care how many Notre Dame fans hate the rivalry or hate playing the rivalry, which I hear it's just it's a loud minority that hates the Notre Dame Navy rivalry, but it's just hard to get a game against them.
Right. It is. I mean, Delaware and a Delaware administrator I was talking to this summer told me it was a matter of they had to get it done. There was so much fan demand for the game that Delaware fans were looking to get this game back because it's such an easy trip. But it's just hard to do. I mean, you make a great point. I'm sure Delaware was working on it really for a couple of years, maybe or so, or at least one cycle to get it scheduled up, maybe 5 years or so ago.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it's like for me, who tracks the Service Academy schedules, of course, seeing Navy kind of waste their I guess their non-conference game from you, I guess waste like next year they scheduled Wagner. It's like, really? It's like, that's what you do with your one game. But I will say this, back to what happens on the field is the case against Navy. Navy's got a strong defense, even though they lost probably their biggest piece in Diego Fago, the linebacker for the Naval Academy. So they lost him. And on offense too, while Navy has a good crop of young slot backs, who will stretch the field, which that's always been kind of like a Navy specialty, like these soaking wet slot backs that'll, break open the game. I don't think they have a fullback on their roster that's gotten significant playing time, really ever. So that's also huge thing because like the option, of course, runs through the fullback. I mean, Army has had in years where Army has had no fullback play, that's when the option's been the worst. So that also is a thing that that could help Delaware win. Like if they force Ty Lobtai to make plays or force the fullbacks to beat them, particularly. I mean, not even Ty Lobtai, but force the fullbacks to beat them. Then I can see Delaware, making this a more competitive game. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point too. I mean, Navy, improve, but they just continue to play tough schedules, and they just seem to be one step away. So
it's a great point you make about the fullback because I've been wondering how Navy's personnel will match up against the personnel that Delaware brings on defense, because Delaware does return a really experienced defense. There was a head coaching change, but Delaware kept its defensive coordinator. Manny Rojas is still the DC for Coach Carty. He sticks around even with the coaching change. So the Delaware defense brings back a bevy of all conference players, and they had their DC still in place at the top. So there's consistency there. The Delaware defense really is not learning a new scheme whatsoever. The philosophy is the same. Maybe the way they do things practically or the implementation will be a little more aggressive even than under the prior coaching staff. But the defensive coordinator, Manny Rojas, is still in place at Delaware, and he runs a 3-3-5 defense. So you have to wonder how much of that he'll be forced out of with Navy's run-heavy attack. I mean, Delaware loves to stack the secondary. Noah Plack, Kedrick Whitehead, Monte Struthers, and Justice Henley all conference level players or at least that's how they're perceived by a lot of folks around Delaware, at least. And so Delaware loves to have that many players in the secondary, but will they be forced to bring some guys into the box against the option remains to be seen. But it's just so interesting the way you point out Navy's fullback situation, having younger players looking to step in at that position, and Delaware being so experienced more on the back end of its defense. Maybe the strengths aren't really matching up here as much. There are strong sides of the ball for both teams, but you have a defense in Delaware that really does well defending the pass or profiles to do well against the pass. And then you just don't know how exactly Navy is going to look in its fullback side, as you've articulated.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, I guess, simply put, I guess I don't want to be Captain Obvious, but they just got to exploit the weaknesses,
Right.
I guess like you said, there's like not really a direct matchup, that kind of, it's like, this will be the key matchup for sure. But it will be interesting. It will be interesting to see that game on Labor Day weekend for sure. But yeah, I guess as we move on to our last topic, as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, you've been putting in work at a fall camp at Delaware. So how are the Blue Hens looking? I guess anything that you want to share, and anything that's not confidential that won't get you in trouble, just share it.
Well, that caveat's important because I'm really thankful to have had a chance to take a look at the hens of each of their days of practice that have been open to the media. All the media available portions I've attended It's kind of similarly to an NFL or Power 5 program. Coach Cardi is running a system where the first half of practice is open, and then there's the closed back half of the practice where they're doing a little more. I'm speculating that in that time they're doing a little more scrimmaging, a little more blue versus white, a little more good on good, and ones versus ones, one versus twos, two versus twos, etc. So I'm not seeing that as much, and not getting a sense of the depth chart in that regard. But you just look at positionally how Delaware is looking on the offensive line is where a lot of people's attention is this August, and that's rightfully so for Delaware, because I touched on the key is keeping Nolan Henderson upright at quarterback. Delaware is 10-2 combined in the past 2 seasons, fall 21 and the spring 21, 10-2 overall record with Henderson starting games and playing in games. So Delaware has won 10 games in the past 2 seasons with Henderson on board, and Henderson barely played or didn't quite play half the season last fall. So when no one's on the field, Delaware has looked pretty good of late. But the key is keeping him there, right? And the offensive line is a big piece in that. So Delaware has brought in Cole Snyder from Montana State. A couple transfers from Georgetown are also on the offensive line, including Joshua Stevens, who's really shown well. Coach Cardi said so far in camp. So just Delaware's looking to build depth there. Coach Cardi's spoken about how they need to be able to rotate guys even within the starting line and make sure that if you have a guard goes down the starting offensive line, you can slide a tackle over, and you're not necessarily bringing up a player who's just not ready. A younger player is not ready. You're going to have to bring somebody off the bench, but maybe it's just another starter level player. But they want to have as many starting level guys they can who are just sliding across the line as they're able, as guys get banged up over the course of a season and into the playoffs, as Delaware is fortunate enough to advance there. So offensive line is a big point of emphasis for Delaware. It's probably the single biggest story this training camp. But to go from there, you got to look at the defense again and what Coach Rojas is doing with his defense. I think it's fair to this is something we've seen in our media availability of practice. So it wouldn't be unfair for me to speak about Coach Carr has commented on it too. I think he has, or Coach Rojas, some combination thereof in our press conferences, spoken about Anthony Toro, a linebacker for Delaware, shifting up the defensive line, really becoming like an edge rusher full time. For the foreseeable future, Toro will play defensive line. And if you haven't seen Toro's game, he really profiles well as an edge rusher. He does well putting his hand in the dirt. He really played a nice outside linebacker for Delaware, has had a nose for the ball throughout his career. But I think Delaware will benefit from Toro the Bull, right? His ability to edge rush. What better name for an edge rusher than Toro? So I have to like Anthony Toro there as he makes that transition. But look at the defensive line a little closer. One other training camp's headline that I'll be able to share is Fenton Bros, one of the 2 Bros brothers for Delaware, Fenton Bros. He played defensive line for Delaware last season in the spring ball session with Coach Cardi first on the field. They flipped him over to the offensive side of the ball. So he's now on that offensive line as they're continuing to try to find bodies for that O-line to really be reliable O-line in both rush protection and pass protection. So Fenton Bros have really done well on the offensive line as well, by all accounts. But there are still concerns overall about that entire line. How's it going to gel? Is everybody going to be able to stay on the field? Is there going to be that cohesion? How's the line going to adapt to this new playbook over time? Because there's going to be a lot of passing. There's going to be a lot of time to pass protect, and it's going to be more than this line has been asked to do in the past in terms of pass protection. So I'd say those are huge storylines, just some positional changes, keeping track of players' health, but really it centers on the offensive line. We kind of went in a big circle, right, in my answer to your question, but it goes in a circle and it goes back to the O-line because that's been a spot that has hampered Delaware in recent years. And it's unfortunate because you say that and it always sounds like, oh, when you talk about the O-line, it's negative, right? If we're not talking about the offensive line, they're not getting their shine, they're just doing their job, right? But for folks who have watched Delaware, folks who cover Delaware, really, it's apparent that the ceiling for Delaware is going to be decided by the offensive line. And of course, you can't exclude the defense and special teams. That's going to be important too. I mean, Delaware is trying to replace Ryan Coe at kicker, who transferred to Cincinnati. So Cincinnati's about to be a Power 5 school. So Coe is a big leg going off to that level of football, and he's earned that. But so Delaware has some question marks in the specialists as well. Who's going to be handling the punting and place kicking? There's a bit of a competition ongoing in both of those areas, but really, you want to touch on those things, but it truly does center back to that O-line because it's going to decide how far Delaware can go.
Well, I mean, shoot. I mean, at least you didn't give the basic answer. It's like, oh, this quarterback's looking strong. He's coming into his own and everything. So, I mean, that's the most comprehensive Delaware preview I've heard from anyone. I'm excited to see what the Blue Hens can do because anytime, with the friends I've met on these platforms, it's I kind of root for their teams as well. So, I mean, the Blue Hens will be in my heart, but except for the round 1 rivalry, because I mean, right. I want Delaware State to get at least 1 win in that series because it's good for the series. Parity.
It is. It would be healthy. It would be healthy because there is some fan apathy in some ways. To speak to Newark, there's just some wondering about it, what makes this series really justifiable from a competitive on-field standpoint. So if you have an upset along the way, that would change a lot of people's perceptions, at least in my parts here.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, Delaware State had the best defense. Excuse me, I was talking to Dwayne from the Yard
Yep.
HBCU a couple days ago. But yeah, like he told me they have the best defense in the MAC last year. They're returning a bunch of starters on Rod Milstead's team. They have the type of, I guess, that sort of upset profile where they run the ball very well. They're returning Bertrand or Thomas Bertrand Houdon, who from watching a healthy dose of Delaware State football during the spring pandemic season because I had nothing better to do. Noticed that he was a good workhorse, good counter for the passing game. It's year 3 of Jared Lewis's starting tenure at quarterback. So a lot to like there for that upset pick. And there for me, they were picked 4th in the MEAC, but they're my sleeper pick for the Celebration Bowl. So I guess that's a long way to say. I guess I'm rooting for Delaware, except for in the Route 1 rivalry. I mean, at least until Delaware State gets a win. But yeah, really appreciate the preview and the work you're putting in for the Blue Hens, man.
Well, thank you so much for having me back. It's great to be back with you. I know our summer schedules are so hectic, and we got it in, and I'm so glad we did. It's been fun. And once again, we went from Stanford to Colgate to Newark to Navy. So really, I don't think there's anything. What better, right? So it's been fun.
Exactly. As usual. And I know you wanted to plug your Patriot League preview. So I'll let you plug that, but as a one final thing.
Oh, great. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me. I really should. I guess should have been at the top of my mind here. But yeah, folks, anybody who might be interested, herosports.com, 2022 Patriot League football preview out now. It follows along with the template of our other conference previews. I went through the Patriot League's all conference returning players for each school. Everybody who returned all conference players, listed them there, including whether they were first or second team. So you get to get a little bit of a sense of all the names coming back. Holy Cross has 16 returning all conference players, Omar. So I know you're going to like the sound of that. That sounds pretty good. That's more than double what Fordham returned, unless you count Ryan Greenhagen. So I should name drop him because Ryan Greenhagen is the best tackler in Division I. So I have to drop his name as well. So Holy Cross was really good there. I won't give too much though give it too much away anyway about this preview. It's all on herosports.com. And when you're on herosports.com, you also found our FCS Central preseason page, all the conferences in one place as the previews continue to come out. So we encourage you to go take a look at that. Sam and I really appreciate it. So thanks, Omar, for giving me that pedestal for a moment anyway.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I enjoy reading Hero Sports and stuff. And I gotta say, of course, you say Greenhagen's the best tackle, but he hasn't been getting the Senior Bowl love that Jacob Dobbs has been getting.
Yeah.
So I mean, I will say that as a caveat. But even if you don't find your way to watch to read Dan's Patriot League preview, I have 3 words for you for the Patriot League season to look forward to: Sluka versus Demorat. That's all you got to know. That's all you got to know.
I thought you were going to say Ram Crusader Cup, but I guess that means the same thing, right?
That too. Yeah. I guess so. Yeah, that too. Ram Crusader Cup as well. This year it's at Fitton Field. So it's great. It's at home because I was super nervous for last year's Ram Crusader Cup. I mean, it's at Coffee Field. This is for all the marbles, and Holy Cross came out victorious.
Yeah, there's so much to like about Fordham versus Holy Cross. I mean, it really could very easily decide the auto bid, and that's just going to be so much fun for there to be a trophy game and the auto bid on the line, possibly.
Yeah, for sure. And don't sleep on Colgate, because Colgate, they're in a situation where, like, if they would have beat Holy Cross in the inaugural EBW Classic, then they would have been the ones taking the title. But so don't sleep on Colgate. It's just a small conference. There's just so much parity in the conference that's small, like the Patriot League, and small like the MEAC. So I'm excited as always for Patriot League ball in the fall.
I'm right there with you. Let's get it. Let's do it. Let's ride.
Yeah, let's get it. But Dan, thank you again for coming on. I'm glad we were able to line this up. As always, it certainly won't be the last time you're on the podcast. I'm sure we'll find something to talk about during the fall season. We'll line things up when things are less busy, for sure. I guess less busy for me. I mean, for you, I mean, the grind's not going to stop. But yeah, so I'm excited for the next time already.
Yep. Let's Patriot League country. Let's ride. I had to get the Russell Wilson in there. I just thought of the last segment. I had to. Patriot League country. Let's ride.
All right. Until next time, everyone. Let's ride, and peace, love, and soul.